Hello and welcome to the NFL PreSnap Podcast. We're going to go over Week 17 in daily fantasy. Now, it is an interesting slate. We have 13 games on the board. However, on FanDuel and Yahoo, it's a little bit of a different 13 games because they did not flex the Chargers game into the slate, and they still have the Sunday night game, which is Steelers versus Ravens, on the slate. So there is a little bit of difference there. Just know if you're playing on either platform that that difference is there. Now, the headliner game of the slate is obviously the Bears versus Lions. It's a total of 52 points, which is quite higher than the next closest, which is Vikings at Packers at 49 now. Now, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as this helps us out greatly and continues to give us the ability to keep putting out content for free. Thank you very much. Now let's just jump right into it. So at quarterback, we have Jared Goff. It's the highest game total of the week. It's the top QB on the LineStar matchup tool. He is much better at home. Chicago ranks 32nd versus QB over the last 4 weeks. And Goff, in games where he's favored, is averaging almost 27 fantasy points a game. At his fairly low salary, I think you gotta kind of like Jared Goff here. Next, we got Mike White. It's versus Seattle. Seattle has a very bad defense, ranked 22nd on the year versus QB. He is super cheap. He's averaging over 20 fantasy points per game, and that is including the Week 14 game versus Buffalo, of which he got injured and didn't put up quite as good of a score. Mike White has been very solid in fantasy, and he has some really nice stacking options that are fairly cheap. So you can stack Mike White and the Jets, and then also pay up for some studs otherwise in other places. Some other places that I do like for the quarterback, I think Tom Brady is kind of interesting, although we haven't seen the ceiling out of him that we are used to. So that is the one caveat that makes him not that attractive. And then also Aaron Rodgers in a very similar situation. Second highest game total. If the Vikings get to a lead and Rodgers is forced to play a little quicker, he could really produce there. And then also you got to consider the Eagles quarterbacks. Not totally sure who's starting yet, Minshew or Hurts, but I think whoever starts there is pretty interesting. Now, let's get into the running backs. Obviously, we got to go with Christian McCaffrey. Good old run CMC versus the Vegas Raiders. Vegas is ranked 27th, allowing one rushing touchdown per game over the last 9. If there is ever a lock for a touchdown, it could be CMC this week. He's just very likely to get in here. This offense runs around him. He's been great in it. He's averaging 26 fantasy points a game over the last 4 weeks. The 49ers still have something to play for, and this Raiders D is just awful. So if you have the salary, by all means, plug in CMC. Next, we got James Conner versus the Atlanta Falcons, ranked 29th, allowing 120 rushing yards per game over the last 9. But really the story here is James Conner has an just absolutely insane workload over the last couple weeks. And if he continues to get this kind of workload versus a poor rush D like the Falcons, I think you have to look at it and you have to like his chances. One thing you do need to consider, though, is that he did miss practice on Wednesday and Thursday due to an illness. It was an illness. It isn't, a nagging knee or something like that. So if he plays, he should be good to go. Just monitor to make sure he's playing here. So, and next we got Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. Antonio Gibson was just ruled out. So you really have to like Robinson's chances here. He could get a couple extra rushes, a couple extra targets, and that really just raises his floor here. He's in a good matchup. Washington wants to feed him the ball. They keep going to him. They have been run first, and Cleveland D versus running back is just frankly bad. They're ranked 27th, allowing 116.7 rushing yards a game, and 25th, allowing 0.8 rushing TDs per game. So I really like Brian Robinson's spot, especially at his discounted price. Now next, we're just going to pick on the Seahawks here. We got Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight. Uh, Seahawks just aren't good. Ranked 31st to the RB, allowing over 118 yards a game and 0.9 touchdowns. So really like Zonovan. Now let's get into the wide receivers. We have Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. Obviously, if you're going to go with Jared Goff, you're probably going to put Amon-Ra St. Brown into your lineup as he is your number one option. But Amon-Ra is just in a really good spot here. Highest game total. Bad Bears defense. Amon-Ra is averaging 11 targets per game over the last 4. And Bears ranked 24th in yards to the wide receiver and touchdowns to the wide receiver over the last 9 games. So he's in a really great spot. Next, we got Keenan Allen. He's averaging 12.75 targets a game, 9.25 receptions, and 92.5 yards over the last 4 games. He's just been a target monster. Herbert's looking his way early and often, and the Rams ranked 22nd versus wide receivers on the season. So Allen is just clearly in a really good spot. Now, if you're not on DraftKings and you're using FanDuel or Yahoo, I think you could pivot to Chris Godwin here. They're similar priced. Godwin has also been a target monster in a very similar situation versus a meh D. So that would be your pivot there. And next, we can go to the Denver Broncos with Courtland Sutton. Now, this is a little bit weird here. It is in KC. Broncos have been bad. They just fired their coach, so there is some controversy there. Now, if the players weren't buying into that system, and with a new coach, they may want to play a little harder. This could be a little closer game than we really expect. And with Greg Dulcich out, or likely out, we could get more targets going Sutton's way. Sutton's just too cheap for the possible upside that he has with the potential targets. And KC is ranked 25th, allowing 1.1 receiving touchdowns per game to the wide receiver over the last 9. Not to mention that Russell Wilson did have his best game of his season versus the Chiefs just a few weeks ago. And that was when Courtland Sutton was out. So with him back, Wilson should be able to have a decent game here. Now, I don't like the game as much as I would if it was in Denver. In KC just tends to play not quite as aggressive. So I would expect a little lower scoring game than the last time we saw it. Now, as far as some cheap wide receivers I like, I think DJ Chark's in a really good spot. The Green Bay wide receivers are really interesting. I like pretty much all of them. And if Watson is out, then there's a lot of really cheap options there between Lazard, Dobbs, and Cobb. Also think Curtis Samuel is extremely interesting. He crushed earlier in the season with Wentz. And so with Wentz being back as the QB, Wentz has a lower ADOT than Heineke did. Heineke liked to throw the ball further down the field, where Wentz is a little more dink and dunk, but probably a little bit more of volume. So I do like that spot. The other one I do like is Corey Davis. Now, let's jump into the tight end here. First, we got to talk about Travis Kelce. He's likely the obvious chalk at tight end. He has way bigger upside than everybody else on the slate in tight end, but I don't love this matchup. The reason being is Kelce just hasn't done much versus tight end for a few years. He hasn't been over like 18 fantasy points versus Denver since 2020, and games in KC versus Denver tend to be a little bit lower scoring. So I don't love it. However, Denver ranks 31st, allowing 71 receiving yards to the tight end, and they rank 32nd over the last 4. So by all means, Kelce could get there. I just don't love it if the field is going there. And another tight end option here, we got Tyler Conklin. It's the week 17 Tyler bump. So Seattle has just been really bad versus the tight end, but they've been good to the WR1, which means there's just going to be more targets on a bad bad defense going to Davis, Moore, and Conklin. I think Conklin has a decent floor here, and I could expect 4 or 5 receptions, 50, 60 yards, something like that. And if he gets in a touchdown at his prices, you're really loving it. And I think there's a good chance of that one. Seattle does rank 32nd on the year at versus tight end. As far as defenses go, I think the Jets are in a really good spot versus Seattle, especially if Tyler Lockett plays. We saw last week that Seattle just had a really hard time moving the ball when they really only had Metcalf and Walker. Next, we have 49ers versus Raiders. I like the 49ers a lot. Raiders are going to Jared Stidham and sitting Derek Carr. So you got to love that spot where you have a new quarterback. And also for FanDuel or Yahoo, I think the Steelers are pretty interesting. That Sunday night game is only a 38 total. So we could expect a lot of defense. Also, Lamar Jackson likely is not going to play. And lastly, we have our touchdown calls of the game. I am going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Chicago ranks 24th, allowing 1.1 receiving touchdowns to the wide receiver over the last 9. This is the highest scoring game of the week. I think Amon-Ra is getting in the end zone. Book it. Anyways, guys, have a great week. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we'll see you next week. Have a good one. Bye.